What is going on, guys? The 2024, no, that's not it. What year is it? All right, try this again. What is going on, guys? The 2025-2026 pro volleyball season is about to start, and I'm going to get you ready for the 2025-2026 Italian LegaVolley season. Let's go. For the new fans out there, the Italian LegaVolley is arguably the best league in the world, and it's made up of 12 teams competing for 8 playoff spots. Now, they'll be competing in a 22-match home and away season with the 8 top teams going to the playoffs and the last place team getting relegated to A2 at the end of the season. The foreigner rules, as there's foreigner rules in most professional countries, are as to follow. Now, each team is allowed to have 4 foreigners on the court, which means you always have to have 3 Italians on your 7-person roster, your 7 active players at the same time. Now, that does mean that you can have 4 foreigners and 2 Italians on the court, as long as the libero or the middle, who is off the court currently, is also Italian. Coming into the season, I think that there's generally 3 groups of teams in the LegaVolley. The first one are going to be the relegation teams. Now, this is going to be 5 teams who are going to be trying to fight off of a relegation, but also who are going to be fighting for that 8th and final playoff spot. The next group is made up of 4 teams, and these are going to be the mid-table teams, as I call them. They're going to be the teams who are going to rank anywhere from 7th to 4th, and they're all going to be battling for playoff ranking. And then finally, you have the 3 elite teams, the 3 teams who are head and shoulders above everyone else, and they're going to be fighting for another championship, just as they are year in and year out. I'm going to go on descending order based off of last year's finish, so we're going to start with the relegation teams. Last year's relegation race came down to the very final day of the season, with Monza, a team who had been in the finals the year before, barely scraping by with a 5-set win to save their season. This did see Taranto head down, not Toronto, Taranto with TA head down to A2, and we saw Cuneo come up from A2 into this year, and that is where we're going to start. Now, Cuneo, who got the promotion from A2, is in the classic volleyball position of having made their roster essentially last fall, not knowing that they were going to be promoted into the top division of Italian volleyball. Because of this, only 2 players on this roster are left over from last year's team, which kind of sucks for those guys because they worked so hard to get their team into the top league and then don't even get to reap the rewards. But that's when you get in volleyball. Volleyball is volleyball. Just great. Now, this has led to Cuneo having a mix of players from A2 last year, while also being able to pick up a few veterans who are used to playing in Italy's top league, and has created an interesting mix of some young guys coming up from A2 and then what possibly might be the starting roster with the most players born in 1980 on it. Despite all of this, I actually think that this team is going to be half decent. I think that the guys that they brought in are pretty good, and especially 3 of them are really going to anchor this roster pretty well. First and foremost, the big ticket item that they brought in is Italian legend Ivan Zaitsev. And now, Ivan Zaitsev did have a cup of coffee playing for Monza last year before the 37-year-old ran off to Turkey to play for Galatasaray, where he actually had a decent season. But the LegaVolley is a much different beast than the Effler League, especially when it comes into playing some of those lower level teams. And since they are going to be one of those lower level teams, there's not going to really be any weeks off for Ivan Zaitsev to get some rest. And at 37 years old, it is going to be a long season for him. At the end of the day, I think how well Zaitsev plays is ultimately going to decide how far this team can go. But I actually don't think he's going to be the go-to player this season. That instead is going to be one of the Discord favorites, Marko Sedlacek. As people say, God works hard, but Marko Sedlacek's agent works even harder. I actually don't think his agent had to work that hard this year because Sedlacek scored over 300 points. So that's going to be a really, really good pickup for Cuneo. The third player with these 3 anchor veterans is going to be the longtime setter, Michele Baranovic. Now, Baranovic helped Cisterna get a playoff spot last year before they moved on from him, and he was signed on for Cuneo. So I think his veteran presence and steady hand will really help this team, especially in the dog days of the year. I think one of the biggest question marks has to be on the right side, where they have 2 potential guys, and now it looks like they're going to go with French opposite Nathan Farrell, who comes in from Toulouse. And the real question is can he keep up with the big guns? Can he play at this level on a consistent basis? And if he can't, it looks like they're going to have Lorenzo Sala, who we've seen in A1 a few times over the past few years. Ultimately, can either of these guys help Cuneo stave off relegation and stay in for a second consecutive year, which isn't always the case for the teams coming up from A2. Next up, we have the aforementioned Monza, and there's no way to beat around the bush. Monza had the worst drop-off in all of pro volleyball in the 2024-2025 season, right? They went on a legendary run all the way to the Coppa Italia finals and the Scudetto finals back in 2023-2024, and then we're just a set away from getting relegated last year. On paper, their roster got worse. There's no way to deny that, but I actually think that they're going to be better than they were last year. Last year, they put a lot of eggs in the basket of bringing back the legendary duo of Osmani Montorena and Ivan Zaitsev. But Ivan Zaitsev ran away to Turkey before things could really get going, while Osmani Montorena battled injuries all year long, which left the young Luca Martilla and Eric Roars to really shoulder the big load for a team that wasn't just playing in the Italian league, but also in the Champions League. Now, I don't think there's any doubt that the fact that these two guys weren't ready to play at this level, but also it put them in some serious foreigner issues, which mainly kept Taylor Averill on the bench all season long. To Monza's credit, they did continue with both Roars and Martilla, and both of them are back with a year more under their belt, having played in the best league in the world, and both of them having a strong international season, right? Roars was a mainstay for the German team all throughout VNL and into the World Championships, while Luca Martilla was maybe one of the biggest surprises for Finland when Finland ultimately ended up relegating and knocking out France from the World Championships just a month ago. They also brought in a little bit of support for these two guys on the left side. Recently signed Martin Atanasov from Bulgaria, fresh off a silver medal from the World Championships. I actually don't mind this trio of outsides. I think these are going to be three guys who are going to be able to work pretty hard and probably be a little bit better than they were last season. One of the biggest changes for Monza is definitely going to be on the right side. And first and foremost, in the setting position, they do lose the magician in Cachopa. Now, Cachopa, for a lot of reasons, was kind of a big problem for Monza. Cachopa is interesting, let's say. He's maybe not the most mobile setters. In system, he is a creative magician. But out of system, he's got these little legs that don't make him the most mobile, right? So Cachopa, when you're playing with a team who isn't really great in ball control, isn't really the best. And then because of all this and because of the downfall that we saw from Monza's roster, Cachopa was just unhappy last year, and it just looked like he wasn't having a lot of fun while he was playing volleyball. Instead, Monza went back and brought in Jan Zimmerman, and Jan Zimmerman actually started for Monza 2 seasons before in the 22-23 season when Cachopa was injured and had one of the best seasons of his career. And now, obviously, Zimmerman isn't the quality setter that Cachopa is, but he works hard and he's a little bit more mobile. So I think he's going to be able to mesh with this roster a little bit better. Finally, the biggest loss for Monza, in my opinion anyways, is the loss of Canadian Arthur Schwartz. And now, you guys can say whatever you want about Arthur, but at the end of the day, this guy knows how to score. He scored 309 points for this team last year and really kept them afloat when some other guys couldn't get the job done. Instead of Schwartz, who's now moved on to the Polish league, they brought in Christian Padar. And that is a big question mark for me after having spent some years in China and Qatar. Padar has really only played 1 season in a big league, and that was in Russia. So I think there's going to be some big question marks on whether or not he can get it done at this level. But regardless of how well he plays, I do think that the roster construction for Monza is a little bit better, and we won't see them as close to the relegation race as we saw last year. And in fact, if you want to go and check out the longer preview that I did with the Monty Johnson, Giovanni Montanari from the Discord, he actually thinks that Monza is going to get that 8th and final playoff spot. I don't necessarily agree, but I do think they're going to be better. Next up, we have a team only in their 2nd year in the LegaVolley, and that is Grottazzolina. Grotta, as we call them, or TGE in the Discord, was one of the more interesting teams to watch last year, and I think it's going to be much of the same this year. After being newcomers into the league, they went on a massive run going 4-2 in the middle of the season, where they beat playoff teams like Modena and Milano, while pushing top teams like Trentino and Verona to 5. This run helped them really stave off relegation and get them ready for this season. Now, I think Grottazzolina had a few great moves in the offseason. First of all, they kept a lot of their top scorers from last season, like Dusan Petkovic and Georgi Tatarov, and also bolstered their roster in a number of ways. I think one of the big moves they made was bringing in a young Amir Golzadeh from Iran. Now, he was the MVP of the U21 World Championships back in 2023, and he is a big guy who has a lot of potential, which could mean 2 things. One, either a really good 1-2 punch with the veteran of Dusan Petkovic, but Petkovic is known for getting a lot of points on a lot of swings, so if Golzadeh could be maybe a little bit more efficient, maybe could come in and take that starting position. They also, at the very least, stayed even with their setting, but I think they improved a little bit by bringing in veteran Marco Falashki instead of Zikuski, and then also brought in Giulio Magalini from Trentino instead of journeyman Oleg Antonov. I think in those 2 positions, they upgraded, and while they may have downgraded a little bit in the middle by losing Danny Demyanenko, who was one of the biggest surprises, they did bring in Bulgarian Ilya Petkov, who also just had a huge run at the World Championship. If it's a downgrade, I think it's only a slight one, and I think Petkov is going to have a really good year this year for Grotta. And from everything we've heard, one of the big things about Grotta's team last year was their really good locker room chemistry, and it sounds like all of the moves they made are really going to help that. So I'm expecting another really interesting season from TGE. Next up, we have the 9th place team from last year, Padova. Now, Padova always seems to be able to stick around by finding some of the best young talent in the world. And if you look at the alumni from this team, it is extensive. Guys like Stephen Marr, Yuki Ishikawa, Matteo Bottolo, Yassine Louati, Eric Leppi, Taylor Averill, Ran Takahashi, Fabio Balasso, Luca Porro. All of these guys have worn the Padova jersey. Every year, it seems like they've been able to find some gem to really keep them afloat. But this year may be the difference. And it's a reason why I'm really worried for this team that has been in the Superlega since about 2013. Now, they did a really good job of keeping one of their top scorers from last year, Serbian Vjeko Masulovic, but losing 2 300-point guys is going to be a big hole for this team to fill. Padova was anchored last year on the left side by 2 guys, Luca Porro and the aforementioned Marko Sedlicic, both of them scoring over 300 points. And I'm not entirely sure where they're going to be able to get that scoring from, because instead of going out to pick up some good young talent, they picked up 2 guys with a lot of question marks around them. First of one is Davide Gardini, who they brought back in from Milano. And then the other one is promoting Mattia Orioli from his backup role on Padova last season. And a lot of you might know Gardini from his playing days at BYU, where it seemed like he was going to be a decent prospect. But after a couple of summers kind of flailing away with the VNL roster for Italy and not really doing much in LegaVolley, I have some question marks about both of these guys. I think if either of them is going to be able to do anything, it has to be Orioli. And now he was one of the top outside hitters for the U21 World Championships back in 2023. But this is a guy who's really going to need to figure out how to survive at this level before he can thrive. Another move that they did make is bring in middle blocker Darius McRaven from Long Beach. And while he did look pretty good in the NCAA, there is a massive jump from the NCAA to the LegaVolley, and as a 6'3", maybe 6'4" middle, that is going to be a big jump for a guy that has to prove that he can play with some of the best middles in the world. Ultimately, I have Padova as one of my teams to watch for relegation, and we're going to have to see how they can do with this roster this season. Next up, we have Cisterna, and if you're looking for a team who lost the most from last season, it has to be Cisterna. They had a roster that got them into the playoffs. They lost almost all of those pieces. Let's go down the list of things that Cisterna has lost from last year. First of all is scoring. They had Teo Fol for the past 2 seasons, who has scored more points than anyone in the LegaVolley in 2023, 2024, and then 2024, 2025, right? Scored over 370 points for them. And then they also lost Jordi Ramon, who was also one of the best scorers in the league, 278 points. Another area that they're really good, blocking. They had the best blocker in the league last year with Alexander Nedeljkovic down the middle, who's also gone. What about skill players? They're gone too. We talked about Michele Baranovic. He is gone. And then the best receiver in the league, Domenico Pace, has moved on as well. So this leaves a lot of holes for this Cisterna roster, and I don't think they filled very many of them very well. The only guys they have left from their starting roster are Efe Bayram and Daniele Mazzone, which isn't a great sign for Cisterna. They did bring in Filippo Lanza, who is a veteran, but did get relegated with Toronto last year, and they also have a bunch of unproven young guys. One of those young guys is my guy, Landon Curry from Canada, and while I think Curry is fantastic, he's good in receive and tenacious on defense, he is making that jump up from the Belgian league, and while he does have a lot of experience internationally, he's going to have to prove that he can get it done here in the best league in the world. Another guy that can prove that he can handle the load as a starter in the LegaVolley is going to be setter Alessandro Fanizza. And now Fanizza is touted as a pretty young talent. He did help Italy get a silver medal at the U21 World Championships back in 2023, but he did so by backing up Mattia Bonifante. So it is now his time to prove that he can be a starter in his league. The one real big bright spot for Cisterna this year is bringing in the towering young opposite in Tommaso Barotto. And Barotto is a highly touted young talent who picked up the Best Opposite Award at the U21 World Championships this summer in 2025. But filling the shoes of Teo Fol is going to be a lot to ask from a 20-year-old. Because of all this roster is missing a lot of talent. talent and is also at risk of being relegated this season. Now, I wish we had a clear delineation of the teams who are going to be in the relegation race versus the teams who are going to be fighting for that last playoff spot. But before the season starts, I just think it's too early to tell. And in a few weeks, we're going to have maybe a month or two, we're going to have a much better idea of where that delineation stands. But if you ask me, I think that either Monza or Grotta are going to be fighting for that 8th and final spot, with the other 3 fighting off relegation. Next up, we have the mid-table teams, and I think this grouping of teams is probably the most interesting because all of them made big moves. All of them made some adjustments to either win now or win in the long term. And we're going to start with Modena. Now, Modena is formerly one of the big 4 teams, but they clearly haven't been the same since the pandemic. Now, instead of stars like Engepeth and Bruno, it is going to be a mix of older veterans and younger talent to really push this team forward. The big change for this roster has to be in the setting position. Now, they originally had Luciano De Cecco signed on a 2-year contract, but they essentially did a player swap for Amir Ualu from Norwid Częstochowa in the Polish league. And now there's a lot of reasons for this, but I think the biggest reason comes down to money. Modena was scheduled to pay Luciano De Cecco around 200,000 euros of his overall €500,000 contract for 2 seasons. And it is a big difference paying De Cecco 200,000 versus paying Amir Ualu 75,000. And by all reports too, it doesn't sound like De Cecco had the best year in Modena last year and maybe didn't really mesh with the squad. So it might actually be better for both parties for just them to move on and to move forward. Despite De Cecco maybe not having the best season, he's still one of the best setters in the world, and that is going to be a big load for Ualu to step into. Don't get me wrong, I think that he is one of the best setters in the world, but I did get to see him at the VNL this year, and he is big and physical and delivers the ball really, really well, but still has a long way to go in terms of being a starting setter who can feel the game and feel the way his roster is playing. He kind of lacks some rhythm out there at some times, and I think this is going to be one of his biggest learning curves in the best league in the world. They also have 2 very similar setters as they brought in Argentinian Matias Giraldo to back him up, who's another tall physical setter. Other than the setting position though, I really like some of the upgrades or moves that this Modena team has made. They brought in Luca Porro in place of Tommaso Rinaldi, which I think is one of the best moves they could have made, and then replaced the Cuban Jose Miguel Gutierrez with Brazilian/Canadian Arthur Bento. Porro really brings another dimension to this team, and I think it says so much about him, saying that he was the first guy off the bench for the World Champions this fall. While he is a little bit undersized, he's a smart attacker who scored over 300 points last season for Padova, is very strong in receive, has a really high volleyball IQ, and just has really good ball control all around. Bento and Porro are going to join Vlad Daviskiba, and the Belarusian was their second top scorer last year, so the fact that they've got 3 really strong outsides really bodes well for this Modena team. Modena also picked up Luke Perry, which might be one of the most underrated transfers this summer, as Perry is one of the most underrated and best liberos in the world, so he's really going to help center that ball control. So when you look at their big setter and the fact that they're going to have such good ball control, I'm excited to see what Modena can do. Especially given the fact that when you look at Modena's roster, they're really strong down the middle on the right side. Paul Buchkager, the Austrian, was one of the top scorers in this league, and he's backed up by one of my favorite players from the World Championships, Ahmed Ikbari. So you've got 2 guys who are aggressive and can score on the right side, and then down the middle, you've got some really nice pieces, centered by the legendary and veteran 2-time world champion Simone Anzani. You also have Giovanni Sanguinetti, and now Sanguinetti was also a part of the World Championship roster, but sprained his ankle and had to leave the team. But it does leave a perfect opening for Pardo Amati, who was one of the best middle blockers for the U21 World Championships this summer. And he is a guy that Italian guys really tout as one of the next big things. And we've got some people in Discord who really think he's ready. So you've got some veteran guys who are ready to teach the next young talent in Italy here for Modena. I think barring some injuries, this could be a really good season for Modena. If Luca Porro can stay healthy, that means they can really have some different rosters, right? Filippo Federici is still coming back for another year, so you've got some different options there as well if you want to put him in and put in Bento and Daviskiba. I'm excited to see what this Modena team can do, and I think they made some good moves in the offseason. Next up, we have Milano, and now Milano is another team that made some really interesting moves in the offseason, but I'm not entirely sure if they were the best ones. There's a lot of turnover from the 24-25 roster, and it's very, very clear that much like Modena, Milano's trying to set themselves up for the future. Most importantly, they kept a hold of Ferry Regers. And now, unless you've been living under a rock, you'll know that Regers was one of the best scorers at the World Championships this year and has proven that he's one of the more elite opposites in the world right now. He was the second best scorer in the league last year, scoring over 400 points and averaging 5.05 points per set, which is really going to be needed from him this season. Why is it going to be needed is the fact that Milano let their two starting outsides from last year go. Gone is the legend Matej Kaczynski, as well as the French outside in Yacine Nouetzi. And now I think Yacine Nouetzi is going to be missed the most because not only did he score 270 points for them last year, he was also the best serve receiver. In their place, Milano has looked toward the future by bringing in another Belgian player in Sepe Rotti and then bringing Francesco Ricine back from Japan. Rotti is a dynamic outside who is very explosive and could potentially fill the role of Luetti, right? He's been known to be a good receiver both in the Belgian league and in underage world championships in the past, but we also saw how Rotti was targeted by teams at the world championships this year and ended up finding his place on the bench for Belgium after only a few pool play matches. On the other side is they brought in Ricine, who had a very underwhelming season in France and is known for kind of being a small guy who doesn't play like a small guy. He's not necessarily the smartest hitter and is kind of suspect on serve receive. He's known for being a really good jumper and a hard swinger, and he's had a really good start to the season in the past, but as the season progresses, teams figure him out and figure out how to shut the door. And the fact that he's been in this league before and the Italians know him so well, I'm really questioning about how good and how effective he can be for this team all season long. Now, the other option on the outside for Milano is Japanese player Tatsunori Otsuka, who provided a really good spark for this team off the bench last season as well for Japan this summer. But I really don't think he's ready to be a starting player at this level yet. Over the past couple of years, they had Paolo Porro, who I think is one of the most underrated setters in the world, and instead they brought in Cachopa. And now on paper, Cachopa might be one of the best setters in the world and could be an upgrade, but as I talked about before, he's a little suspect when there's not great serve receive. And just like I talked about between Rotte, Ricine, and Otsuka, I think that this team is really going to struggle passing the ball. Without the ability to pass the ball, that means that this team is going to go to a high ball offense really quick, which isn't a terrible thing for guys like Regers and Rotti, but may see Ricine really struggling. Down the middle, Milano looks all right. They brought in Nemanja Masulovic, who plays for Serbia, and then also have Gabriele Di Martino and Eduardo Konecki, two Italian guys who know how to play this level, are good enough, but won't really strike fear in anyone's hearts. Ultimately, I think that Milano is making some really good moves to bolster their roster for the future, especially keeping guys like Ferry Regers and bringing on Sepe Rotti and, of course, Cachopa. But there's still a few moves away from being a team that can really threaten anyone, just like we saw them over the past couple of seasons. Next up, we have Piacenza. And Piacenza is one of those teams that went from win now to build for the future. A lot of their roster is signed into 2027 and even into 2028, which is really rare in volleyball. On paper, over the past few seasons, Piacenza should have been a team that was competing for titles, but instead we really only saw them winning the Italian Cup back in 2023. The first big move that they made was in the setting position, moving on from Antoine Brizard, who went to Japan, and bringing in Paolo Porro, signing a 3-year contract. And honestly, I kind of love this move. Brizard never really seemed like he fit well in Piacenza, and I was always left wanting more. And I really think that Porro might be one of the more underrated setters in the world right now. I think that he is a fantastic setter and a really good all-around volleyball player, right? He was really good for Milano and was a big part in then upsetting Perugia back in the 23-24 season when they were undoubtedly the best team in the world. Some other big holes for Piacenza this year is going to be left on the left side with the loss of Steven Mar and Uros Kovacevic. And now Kovacevic really wasn't that much of a use for this team, but Mar was one of their anchors and their leading scorer in the regular season and in the playoffs. But in his place and in their place, they brought in 2 internationals as well, Jose Miguel Gutierrez and then Lucas Bergman from Brazil. I don't think that either one of them can replace the production of Mar just yet, but I do think that Efe Mandaracha, who was one of the biggest surprises in the season last year for Piacenza, is ready to step up and be the guy. Now, I think that he is long, he's got ball control. He's kind of like a right-handed Micheletto if I was going to put him, compare him to any player in the league. Another big departure is going to be the departure of Yuri Romano, but Romano, as I've talked about before, and kind of a lot like Brizard, is a guy that can get it done in the gut check times, but kind of floats his way through the regular season. And it's also going to give an opportunity for the young Alessandro Bovalenta to show us we can do. Bovalenta is long and skilled and could very well be the future for the Azzurri. Also backing him up is going to be the French Henri Léon, who is maybe a little bit smaller, but really physical. So I like the duo that they have in Piacenza this season. Low key, I think that one of the best signings for Piacenza this year might be bringing in Domenico Pace, who, as I mentioned before, was the best receiver in the league last season. And it's a big step up from Leonardo Scanfurla, who was kind of a black hole from them last year, where he got aced on 10% of his targets and service in the playoffs. All of those guys that I mentioned, their entire roster on the wings and in the libero position are all born in the 2000s. They're all 25 years and younger, and the only grandpas on this team will be down the middle. Now, first and foremost, they have the absolute GOAT, Robert Landi Simone, who is still there for Piacenza, who is going to be able to provide some really good leadership for this team. And then they also have the 28-year-old Gianluca Galassi, who I really like. Galassi is dynamic down the middle. He brings a lot of fire, and he's kind of hit or miss from the baseline. He's either burying it in the net or he's scoring an ace. But their entire middle team is rounded out by Francesco Camperoni, who should be able to get some time too. And then everyone's favorite, the 19-year-old French middle, Yorish Sedik. And Sedik is a big beast, and he could prove to be really, really good in the long run. So getting to play with guys like Galassi and, of course, Robert Landi Simone could be really good for the young Frenchman. Finally, in the mid-table group, we have Verona. And now Verona is a team that everyone in the volleyball world has their eyes on. And casuals around the world are calling them the next big team because they brought in Micah Christensen and Darlin Souza. But to me, there's just more ifs there, because neither of those moves really addressed any of the problems that this team had last year. Verona has had a lot of really good seasons where they've seen like they've ready to jump up into the elite teams, but once they get into the playoffs, they kind of fall apart. And 2024-2025 was no different. Last year, we saw them get a big win over Perugia in the semifinals of the Italian Cup before losing in the finals to Lube. It really looked like they were ready to go, especially with the season that Nomori Keita had last year. The second best offensive season of all time, scoring 454 points in the regular season while averaging 6.05 points per set, an entire point more than Riegers, who was in the second place last year. Now, an injury to the Rock Mozic before the playoffs led them to a first round 3-dong series loss to Piacenza, and a lot of people are excited about what this team could do in the offseason. The problem for me is that they went out and got 2 players in the 2 of the best positions that they had, right? They went out and got an opposite, and Nomori Keita put up one of the best offensive seasons all time as an opposite. And then they went out and got a setter in Micah Christensen after Abayev set the second best offense in the league last year. It hit a 51.8% and then a 46% efficiency as a team with Abayev at the helm. And now there's no doubt that on paper, Micah Christensen is a huge upgrade, and he probably is in personnel as well too, but those weren't the areas that Verona needed help in. Instead, they went and picked up Darlin. They're going to move Keita to the outside, which this has been a consistent narrative with this team over the past number of years, wanting to have Keita on the outside. But the problem is that he doesn't have the ball control to be on the outside. And their other guy is another offensive powerhouse, Rock Mozic, who is really good offensively, but kind of suspect in serve receive. And then the next guy that they can go to is Francesco Sani. And now I bet you a lot of Italians are much happier having a Sani as an Italian now than they were earlier on, but he's another guy who is offensively gifted, really good from the baseline, and not so great in serve receive. And with D'Amico as their libero, I don't really know who's going to pass the ball for this team. I think the perfect move would have been to go out and get a Luca Porro. Had they been able to get Luca Porro, this team would have been absolutely dangerous, right? A guy who can play that P2 role, who can pass the ball, play defense, set out a system, but still, they're still suffering from the same issues back when they had from the Stoichev days. And now they've moved on from Radostin Stoichev, who is probably the king stooge for us in the Discord in terms of coaches in volleyball. But Fabio Solier is going to have to figure out some big things in terms of how this team plays volleyball, with a bunch of guys who like to bang and a setter who can run a really good offense. But as we saw at the World Championships, Micah Christensen did really, really well with 2 good ball control outsides, and I don't know how this team is going to look with a bunch of guys who can bang balls but can't really pass it. The other big thing that this team is going to find is they're still going to have foreigner issues, right? With the roster that they have right now, unless they're playing Sani, they need to play Lorenzo Cortesia and Marco Vitelli down the middle. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to use a guy like Aiden Zingle, who brought so much juice to this roster this past year, and they're really limiting themselves with the different options and different rosters that they can have, especially down the middle. I know a lot of people are really excited for the signings that Verona made, but I'm still not convinced that this is a team that is ready to jump in to the big time, and I wouldn't even be surprised if we didn't see them finish in 4th and saw them finished a little further down the table. From the mid-table teams to the elite teams, and as I said before, these are the 3 teams who I would be shocked if we didn't see them at the semifinals at the end of the season. Not saying it's going to happen. We've seen some crazy things happen in the past, but these 3 teams are truly head and shoulders above the rest right now in the LegaVolley. As we've been doing this entire time, we're going to go with the 3rd place team from the regular season, and we're going to start with Lube Civitanova. Lube last year was one of the most surprising teams in all of volleyball, starting really, really slowly and then going on a run that saw them win the Italian Cup and go all the way to the Scudetto finals before they lost to Trento. Their roster is pretty much the same. They did have a few big departures, namely 3. The first one is going to be the hole left by Adis Lugumja. Now, Lugumja was really big for this team, scored 267 points throughout the year, and was really one of the go-to guys for Lube, especially in the playoffs last season. And instead of bringing in a typical opposite, they actually only brought in one opposite, Pablo Kurkartsev from Argentina. If you saw Kurkartsev's performance for Argentina against Italy at the Olympics, you might question if this guy is ready to be a starter in the LegaVolley. And the reality is that I don't think he's going to be. So far this season in preseason play, Lube has mostly gone with a 3 outside hitter system, having Mattia Botlo, Alex Nikolov, and then Eric Lepke on the right side. This is the lineup that we saw this team win the 2025 Italian Cup last season, so I don't think it's much of a worry. Even casual volleyball fans should know at least 2 of those names. Alex Nikolov just came off what was an MVP-like performance at the World Championships, dragging Bulgaria to the final, and has really proved that at just 21 years old, he's one of the best offensive players in the game. And while Mattia Botolo had his best season ever last year for Lube, leading them to the finals, we also saw him transition that for the Italian team this summer, where he was huge for them at the World Championships and went on that memorable serving run in the 4th set to really clinching it by acing his teammate in Nikolov. Now, rounding out this outside group, we're going to see Eric Lepke, and now Eric Lepke, of course, close to my heart. EFL has been a huge story for Canadian fans in the LegaVolley over the past couple of seasons. And now I'm really excited to see him on the right side once again. I think that the summer off will have really done him some well, and he's going to help anchor this team really, really well. The other big departure for this team is going to be French middle guard Chen Agnese, and now Chen Agnese is known as one of the best middles in the world, but it didn't really seem like he meshed with this roster too well, especially with Mattia Bonifante coming into set. And instead, they brought in Vutuhir. This is a guy who put up some fantastic numbers last year, and I'm really excited what he can do as a starter. But you've also got some really nice other names. Of course, you have the legendary veteran Marko Podeschanin from Serbia, who's there to bring a bit of experience. And then also Giovanni Gargiulo, who really came into his own last year for Lube in the playoffs. But the big question for me in this roster this year is can Mattia Bonifante get over that sophomore slump? And now, I actually don't even know if the sophomore slump is something that we're used to seeing in Italian volleyball, but it's something that we definitely see in North American sports. And part of the reason for Lube's slow start last year was Bonifante having to step into the shoes of Luciano De Cecco. And now, earlier on in the year, it seemed like Lube was really going to struggle, and there was even questions if they were going to be a playoff team. And instead, they really turned things on when Bonifante took control of the offense and the roster. So let's see if he can do it once again and help lead this team to another podium finish this year, both domestically in Italy and of course in the Champions League. Next up, we have the team that finished in 2nd place in the regular season, 3rd in the playoffs, and that is Perugia. And it seems like every year we always put high hopes and big expectations on Perugia. And this year is no different. And now, in some ways, we like to call their president, Gino Cerci, the Jerry Jones of volleyball. But at the other side, he actually put together a really good roster, and year in and year out, he's done a good job at just tweaking a few things. And now the defending Champions League holders really didn't make many changes. They've got their entire starting lineup back, but I do think that they got a lot better in this offseason, and here's why. Mainly, their bench already got stronger, right? They already had one of the best trios of outsides in the world with Ole Plotnitsky, Kamil Semeniuk, and Yuki Ishikawa, but now they're going to add Donovan Dazveronok to that list. And now Dazveronok is a guy who knows how to score efficiently, and I think that we're really going to see him get some playing time. Last year, Angelo Lorenzetti, head coach of Perugia, really used all of his options. And Dazveronok is, in his own right, a very, very good player who got the short end of the stick for the past couple of seasons at Verona. So I'm really excited to see how he can fit into this roster. As I mentioned, Lorenzetti likes using a lot of guys, and Perugia is going to need that. They're signed up for literally every competition there is this year, and they're really going to be going for that infinity gauntlet, right? They have the opportunity to do so by going to the Club World Championships as the European representative. They're going to be in the Italian Cup, they're going to be in the Supercoppa, they're going to be in the league, and of course they're going to be in the Champions League. So Perugia has that possibility of finally getting that infinity gauntlet, which we haven't really seen in men's volleyball since Zena Kazan was able to do it. Now, I think one of the biggest moves that this team made was by bringing 23-year-old libero Marco Gaggini in to compete for the libero position, because Massimo Calacci, even though he's been with this roster now for about 7-8 years, is still 40 years old. So having the ability to go to a younger guy who is proven. Gaggini helped Monza get to the finals back in 2024, and I think we're going to see them kind of split the time. A couple of these other bench guys who I think are really going to bolster the roster is first and foremost 22-year-old Gabriel Savanciger from Grottazzolina. The young Croatian is long and explosive, and I think that he's going to be able to learn a lot from Vasim Bentara. And the other guy joining this roster is the young Brian Argilagos, who is a really good young prospect for Italy. He's a 6'7" setter who's tall and he's long. If there's one guy who you want to learn from right now, being a tall setter and who's Italian, it has to be Simone Gianelli, who will once again lead this team after one of his best seasons ever by capturing back-to-back world championships and of course the Champions League earlier this year. Down the middle, this team is really strong and might have the best trio of middles that we've seen. Augustin Lozer is still one of the best middles in the world. Roberto Russo was outstanding with the second most blocks of the world championships this past season. And Sebastian Solé, who is naturalized to be Italian in the views of the Italian league, not on the international stage, can really help bring some veteran presence, while 22-year-old Federico Crozzato, who led Padova in blocking last season, is going to bolster this roster really well. I really think that some of the toughest matches that Perugia might play this season are going to be in practice, right? That entire roster brings quality, and there's really no one that you can look at that is going to be a problem for this team. And I think that some of their practices are going to be really difficult. And I think that's really important when you're going to get the Infinity Gauntlet, because the travel and just the wear and tear involved with playing in so many different competitions is really tough. And I think Lorenzetti is going to be the perfect guy to be able to use the depth of this roster while still keeping his elite guys sharp and ready to go when they need them. Now, finally, we have last year's regular season champs and Scudetto champions, Trentino. Trentino, in my eyes, will once again be favorites to challenge for the league title and kept the majority of the core, except for making a few pretty major adjustment. First change that they made to their roster is I actually think is going to be an upgrade. Now, they had Kamil Richlicki as their opposite last year, and as great as he is, I think bringing in Theo Fall, who, as I mentioned earlier, has scored more points than anyone in the LegaVolley over the past 2 seasons, is a really big upgrade. This is a guy who knows how to score. He's done it in the LegaVolley, he's done it in the VNL, but he also comes from that French system where he knows to share the ball and knows how to not necessarily be the guy. When you have Micheletto on one pin and Fall on the other, that really provides some nice offensive options for Riccardo Sbertoli to spread that ball around. Down the middle, they also lost Jan Kozemernik, and Jan Kozemernik averaged the most blocks per set at almost a block per set at the World Championship, so he's really going to be missed. But bringing in German Simon Torvi from Lundberg last year is a really good pickup. I really like Torvi. Got to see him play for Long Beach as well. This is a big hulking man who can block well and can hit well, and once he learns how to read at this level, and I think he has a chance to be an elite middle in this league. I don't think they're going to lose too much from bringing Torvi in, even though as young as he is, because I think he's just a really good natural leader and has a really good attitude. He's going to mesh really well with this roster. Down the middle, besides Simon Torvi, you're still going to have Flavio, who's going to be the M1 on this team, and Bella Bartha potentially starting some matches or coming off the bench, which I think is a really good middle trio. And in the back row, you'll still have Gabriele Lorenzano, who's one of the best libero prospects in the world. The really big question for this Trentino team is how can they do it without Daniele Lavia, right? The big if comes down to Spaniard Jordi Ramon, and now he was the 12th top scorer in Italy last year while playing for Cisterna, but he needs to fill some really big shoes with the injury to Daniele Lavia earlier this summer in preparation for the World Championships. And now Ramon wasn't brought in to be that P2 guy. He was brought in to be the third option to come in off the bench. So every team in Italy is going to focus all of their power on him, and it is a big if he can step up to the plate and be that guy to play the P2 beside Micheletto. Another big piece to this team moving on is going to be their head coach in Fabio Soli. Soli was there for years coaching underneath Angelo Lorenzetti and now has moved on. But in his place, they've brought in Argentinian Marcelo Mendez. And Mendez is a guy who knows how to win. He did it for a decade with Sada Cruzeiro, winning Club World Championships and Brazilian League titles and all of that. And then also did it with JW for the past few seasons and winning a number of Polish League championships there and getting them to the Champions League final. But I do think that Mendez is a big upgrade for this team, and I really think that they're going to need it, especially without Lavia. But will the upgrade from Mertlicki to 4 and what could be one of the best dynamic scoring duos in the league between Micheletto and Teofo be enough for Trentino to battle alongside Lube and Perugia? I think so. I think that Micheletto is going to continue to prove that he's one of the best players in the world, and he's really going to have to do it this year at most without the Robin to his Batman in Lavia being injured for what is most likely to be the majority of the season. Now that's it for my preview of the 2025-2026 Italian LegaVolley season. What do you think? Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to know a little bit more, you can become a member to our channel and watch the member-only live stream that I did with Giovanni Montanari, or user the Monty Johnson, from the Discord, where we did a 3-hour breakdown. It was a little long. We'll try to keep it shorter in the future. We did a 3-hour breakdown of the season, and we're going to be doing more of those round tables with a few other people from the Discord and other experts throughout the year. So if you want to join the Volleyball Source membership, you can, but if you don't want to, that's fine as well. Thank you very much, guys. Have a great day, and we'll see you soon.